it was worth telling the world what was happening. It was more valuable to do that than to keep trying to patch a broken system from the inside.
A former ICE lawyer is going public as a whistleblower describing broken training he says could have deadly consequences.
I saw a cadet in a scenario where we had bystanders who were allegedly filming or recording what was happening pull out pepper spray and pepper spray a bystander. And when we asked the cadet afterwards why they did it, their answer was, it's because I've seen what we're doing in Minneapolis.
Ryan resigned from ICE 11 days ago, and he joins me now. Thank you for being with us on Minnesota Now, Ryan.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
I understand you joined ICE in August of 2021, and part of your duties were to inform and to train ICE agents. Can you tell me a little bit about how your role started out?
Thank you. So I was originally brought in to work at the South Texas Family Residential Center in Dilley in August of 2021. And my role there was to act essentially as an advisor to the operations taking place at that facility. That included the cycle or period of time where that facility was transitioned from a family detention center into a detention center for adult females. And I was also a trial attorney representing ICE in immigration proceedings. I started working as a trainer at the academy in Glencoe, Georgia in September of 2025. I was brought in on a temporary basis to instruct there because they were bringing in so many new recruits that they needed additional staff to handle that.
When did you start to become concerned about the changes that you were experiencing and watching?
The day I arrived. The day I arrived at the academy, I was shown the memo that's fairly well known now, where ICE instructs its officers that they can enter into a home without a judicial warrant. I was given that memo by a supervisor who made it very clear through the stories they told me and the information they provided about two prior attorneys who had been removed from their instructor roles and one who was even forced to resign, that not teaching the memo or opposing the memo could cost me my job. From the day I started, I had concerns, and those concerns grew when I realized that rather than the 70-day academy that had existed before, we would be teaching a 42-day academy that was heavily compressed and was removing a significant amount of the training material in order to graduate cadets faster.
I wonder what were some of the training specific to use of force issues that you saw cropping up?
What I noticed right away was under the old curriculum, we broke up use of force training into multiple lessons because it's a difficult subject for officers to grasp. And we wanted to make sure under the old system that officers could have multiple bites at the apple to learn the rules they needed to follow and understand all the elements to it, the legal side of it, the practical side of it, the policy side of it, and then apply that in the field in practices that would let us measure whether or not they had actually learned it. We cut out almost all of the training. We essentially left in one kind of rump lecture that was more focused on the policy side of things, but we took out all the training that explained to an officer what was the standard that's used. It was called the objectively reasonable standard for a law enforcement officer. And what that says is it's really asking the police officer to say to himself, what would another officer in my shoes do with the information they know right now? And is what I'm doing what that officer would have done, right? And that's a kind of a universal standard, whether it's ICE or it's another agency, the standard is the same because that's set by the courts.
It is interesting to learn about these legal standards that you are responsible for teaching, that you're hoping that people will retain and understand and live up to when they are out in the field, practicing their duties. How many ICE agents would you say went through the training while you were there and left in a way that you felt they were unprepared to be beginning their duties?
Several hundred at least. There are 4,000 officers scheduled to go through the program. There were about 800 or so that were either done by the time I left or were on the calendar to be done by the time I left. I believe that I worked with somewhere between 200 and 400 officers when I was there. And while I saw officers who genuinely had skills and were capable of learning how to do this, I don't know of any of them who got the training that I thought was appropriate.
There has been a lot of talk, obviously, at all levels of government about what the future of ICE should be, whether it can or should be reformed, whether it should be scrapped and perhaps another agency should be started. What do you think when it comes to reform as ICE is operating now?
Well, that's a great question. And I think the right answer to that question is there has to be a balance. Immigration laws exist for a reason. Our country has had them for a very long time, and they perform a vital function. But that does not justify the way they're being enforced right now. That does not justify the types of operations we're seeing. Those are excessive, is what I would put forward. They're excessive to the agency's purpose. They're excessive to the country's needs in terms of an enforcement process. And if there's going to be reform, if there's going to be something that happens in the future, it needs to be one that is cognizant, that is aware of the public perception of the agency and the need to repair that perception. And whether that's under the name ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, or if that's under another name, that's still the same function, right? No matter what you call it, you still have an officer who's going out to arrest an individual who's in the country unlawfully. What the better question is how do we arrange it so that that officer can perform that duty in a way that is safe for the community, safe for the officer, and safe for the individual being detained, without making it so ineffective that we don't actually have the ability to enforce those laws. And it's a balancing act. And it's a hard one, but it's doable. And it's doable without some of the extremes you see on both sides of the spectrum on this.
I think doable, to your point, but the first step is admitting what is going on. And DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, said in a news release yesterday that it, quote, streamlined training to cut redundancy and incorporate technology advancements without sacrificing basic subject matter content. What do you feel when you hear that based on your experiences and also what you've seen unfolding in Minneapolis the past few months or so under what's been called Operation Metro Surge?
Thank you. So ICE is not changing its training techniques or practices in a way that would justify the drop in hours as we've seen them so far. Okay. There's no magic button you can push that feeds this information into a cadet's head. There is no magic or technological solution to a very basic problem with every law enforcement training academy in the United States or worldwide has to deal with, which is that you're trying to put hundreds and hundreds of hours worth of knowledge into someone's head for them to use in a quarter second or less when they actually have to make a decision on whether to handcuff someone, arrest someone, use force on someone, or shoot someone. Right? There are always scenarios where each of those actions is justifiable. But no matter what we do at a legal level, at a policy level, it always comes down to the individual officer having to use the training they've gotten in that moment. And there is no substitute for practice. There is no technological substitute for the practice they need. So when ICE says that they've streamlined things, they're blind to the reality that it's not enough. These officers don't have the practice they need to do the job correctly. And until the agency admits that, I don't know that you're going to see reform happen within ICE.
Were you training people that you knew would be going to Minneapolis or that you felt were insufficiently trained as they were departing to Minneapolis?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, that was happening. There were many cadets. So at the end of the training process, there are a set of practical exercises where cadets go through and demonstrate their ability to perform the various functions they would need to do, how to approach someone's home to make an arrest at a home site, how to approach someone in a vehicle, make an arrest at a vehicle site, how to do a vehicle stop on a moving vehicle, or how to make an arrest at a business. These are all the basic practical scenarios. And they're where we would see if an officer actually knew what to do when the rubber meets the road, right? What to do in a real world situation. And it was every time I went out, we would ask the cadets, where are you going back to? What's your home office? And the response I would get back would be, well, I'm from the Boston office or I'm from the Miami office, but I'm going home. They're going to give me my gun, my badge, and my body armor, and then I'm going to Minneapolis, right? So even though these officers are staged out throughout the country, they're all getting shipped to these places where these surge operations are taking place. Yes, absolutely. Based on what I witnessed cadets doing in just the last days of training, they don't have the practical skills to do it. So, yes, I'm certain there are officers in Minneapolis who don't have the comfort with the training they received to be confident when they're on the streets as to what they do.
Do you feel at all that cadets are being encouraged to use excessive force, or what do you think the messaging is that is coming through these trainings and the lies that you say that they asked you to tell?
So I want to break two things down here, right? There is what the agency has told the public and what happens at the academy.
Hmm.
And I want to be very clear about something. I worked with some genuinely very skilled instructors at the academy, people who've been in law enforcement, not with ICE, not just with ICE, but with the FBI, with the Air Marshal Service, with um, DEA, other agencies. They're officers who know what they're doing and they're skilled, and they did their best to teach these cadets what they needed to know. And I but will tell you, I never heard an officer say to someone, one of the trainers say to someone, when you get up there, just use force on people, be quick, be violent, right? Never heard anyone say that. In fact, many of the instructors would express to me their concerns that the use of force training that we were giving them and the practical training we were giving them was insufficient. And many of these instructors would come to me with concerns or voice to me their belief that these cadets should have been failed out of the program, that they should have been held back and retrained. But there was no effective way to do it. It really was these last set of courses were historically classes where we could fail a cadet if they couldn't demonstrate their skill set. And they were converted into ungraded, untested labs for the students to run through. And no matter what they did, they graduated. Even when they did egregious violations of regulations, safety, or policy, they still graduated. And can I add one more point to that?
Of course, yeah.
The cadets themselves recognized that they had training deficiencies. Many of them would say to us, I don't feel ready when I leave here. Right? They would tell us that when they were leaving, that they weren't sure this was going to be enough training. And that was even documented in some of the feedback cadets would provide to us on the training program was it needs to be longer, it needs to be more in depth, it needs to be more extensive.
It sounds like you were uncomfortable with what you were witnessing and experiencing for some time. Can you tell us about the moment you decided you had to quit, you had to resign, you had to go public in this whistleblower, very public manner? Tell us about what led to that.
I knew when I started at the academy that there was a problem because of the memo that I was shown. I knew from the start that there was something wrong. But I also took the belief that if I was there and instructing, I could at least ensure the cadets that I was working with were getting a full understanding of the law to the best degree I could give it to them. And it's the same reason I would go to the practical exercises. It was a chance to see them and correct behavior where I could. And I did that for as long as I could. But at the end of the day, I had to measure, am I making more difference with these individual officers that I can talk to, or by telling the world what was happening? And ultimately, the answer was it was worth telling the world what was happening. It was more valuable to do that than to keep trying to patch a broken system from the inside.
I think a lot of people wonder what is the culture right now inside of ICE and DHS, and you've touched on it some, but the fact that things were so flagrant and obvious to you, we haven't heard from many other whistleblowers or many other people who have resigned. I wonder what your conversations were like with colleagues, if there were others around you who were uncomfortable.
I can tell you that there's a culture of fear inside the academy. I had many instructors who would talk to me about their concerns, but they would always do it by looking over their shoulder first. They would do it by talking to me when we were alone, not in a group, never in a group setting, and never where other people could hear them. And I would have faculty members tell me, let's talk about this over here or over there because I don't know who that person is. So there's a culture of fear inside there, but at the same time, and to their credit, the instructors I worked with made their best effort to instruct what they knew, right? They did their best jobs that they could. And I think to answer your question, what are a lot of them doing? I think a lot of them are staying and trying to teach for the same reason I stayed to try to teach, to try to do the best they could and patch what they can from the inside.
What do you hope comes from this testimony that you shared and the stories that you're sharing?
I sincerely hope that what comes from this is that these officers who are being sent out of the academy are given better training, and that the ones who've already graduated, who didn't get the training they need, get the right level of training. But most importantly, I hope that we can create a system where the public has faith in the officers coming out of this academy. And I know that is a very, very long road, because there have been a number of events, some of them deeply tragic, that have happened. And I'm genuinely concerned that because the training has been reduced from what it was before, that what's going to come down the road is even worse than what's already happened.
Ryan Schwank, thank you for sharing your perspective and experiences with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.